Thelema, Coast to Coast, Show 34, September 24th, 2006. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Welcome to Thelema Coast to Coast. My name is John Crow, and I'm the host of the show. Before getting into the show, I want to remind listeners that there are 4 ways to contact the podcast. First is via email at podcast@thelemacoasttocoast.com, the website, www.thelemacoasttocoast.com, voicemail at 206-600-4216, and via the regular mail, Thelema Coast to Coast, care of John Crow, P.O. Box 7045, Marietta, Georgia, Marietta, 30065 in the United States. Also, I want to remind listeners that there is a Thelema Coast to Coast MySpace page. There's currently over 900 people friended on that, and that's a great way to know when new shows come out because I post a bulletin and blog post about it. So that can be found at www.myspace.com/Thelema Coast to Coast. And also there is a Frapper map with the locations of many of the Thelema Coast to Coast podcast listeners, hundreds in fact. I think we have listeners now on all the continents except Antarctica. So I think that's pretty cool. And if you want to be on that list, go to the Thelema Coast to Coast website and click on the Frapper map that's on the bottom of the front page and add yourself. I love taking a look and seeing where all the listeners are from and all the messages they put out there. So I really encourage people to go do that. All right, I want to get into some of the feedback. Received a lot of messages, and I'm going to be reading a few. First is from a listener who calls himself Lux15. He said, John, I enjoyed the paper and discussion you delivered in podcast 33. Would you consider posting online the paper itself? Reading it instead of hearing it would give me a chance to mull it over in a different fashion. Your work is much appreciated. Thanks. In a short answer, it is no. I will not be posting the paper online. That was actually given at a conference in April of 2006, and the selected proceedings of that will be published by Luxor Press. So that should be coming out by the end of the year. And when that does come out, if you are interested in getting a copy of the paper, I'll let you all know how to get a hold of that book, and so you can purchase that and get a copy of the lecture. So unfortunately, because it's being published, I can't put it out on the web, but that will be out in print form if you want to get it by the end of the year. So thanks for emailing, and I'm glad you liked the show. And again, that will be out by the end of the year. The next email is from a listener named Jim. Jim writes, thank you once again for stressing the importance of the Buddhism part of the 0 = 2 equation. I'm a Thelemite from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I've been studying Tibetan Buddhism for quite some time now and have a hard time expressing Buddhist concepts to my fellow Thelemites. Listening to your podcast has helped me to formulate some ideas on how to present these topics. Your discussions with Keith 418 have been a real inspiration to us. Keep up the good work. It's much appreciated. Jim. Well, Jim, I'm glad you liked the lecture that I gave. The Buddhism aspect is, I really didn't go into it. It's from, in my opinion, the Mahayana ideas of Madhyamaka. So I would recommend if you wanted to pick up some of the vocabulary and talk about this with fellow Thelemites, to read some books from Nagarjuna, and in particular there's a book by Garfield J. Garfield. And that is really a great book to kind of get into the ideas. Also, reading some of the ideas about Mahayana and Theravada philosophy will help give you some of the vocabulary so you can articulate a lot of these things. Ultimately, it takes reading and engaging into the material to get the ideas about what this is, as well as gaining the vocabulary to really articulate these ideas. So I would encourage you to read a broad spectrum of books about that, and don't skimp on the scholarly books, because they're the ones who really go in and differentiate things and really expand the vocabulary, and struggle with the Sanskrit and Pali. It's difficult, and in your case, since you're studying Vajrayana, also the Tibetan, it really makes a difference to learn those things and understand those concepts. So thanks again for writing, Jim. The last email is from a listener who calls himself Psyche. He writes, I enjoyed your latest podcast immensely, and the previous one with Keith 418. I've listened to most of your podcasts, but these two stood out more for their sheer volume of content. I hope these lectures will become a regular feature going forward, though not the dominant content, as that could easily become overwhelming, both for yourselves and for your listeners. One notable difference was that you managed to say interesting a few hundred times fewer than usual. You really must find a thesaurus. There are a plethora of words available that can communicate a sense of wonder better than this rather bland, entired word. Best of luck in future shows. Well, thanks for the feedback, Psyche. I found it very interesting. No, I understand that is a word that I say often. And in listening to the interviews in this podcast, you'll find that many of the interviewees were also saying interesting frequently. So what I suggest, instead of banning the word interesting or going out and getting a thesaurus and flexing our vocabulary that way and start saying curious and fascinating and many other words that express wonderment, as you say, instead I think we should start the Thelema Coast to Coast drinking game. And with that, what you can do is grab your friends and listen to the podcast together, or drink by yourself, and grab some beer or some wine, some alcohol, and every time I or one of the guests say interesting, take a drink. By the end of the show, you'll have heard a very interesting podcast, as well as be feeling very, very interesting. So, but thanks for the feedback, Psyche. I appreciate that, and I'll do what I can about diminishing the word interesting in what I say, but not completely, because I wouldn't want to deprive all my listeners of some words to drink by. I also received feedback from Darren, Trent, Justine and her husband, a different Jim, and Brian. So thank you all for sending the feedback, and I really, really like receiving feedback. Hint, hint. So send it in via email, the website, or in particular, call the voicemail at 206-600-4216. I also received an email from Adane. He asked me to mention a new pagan website. I know we have a number of pagan listeners. It's called The Pagan Activist. It's kind of an online pagan newspaper that has articles and forums that can be reached at www.thepaganactivist.com. So go check that out. All right, our guests. We have 3 on today's show. The first guest is Christian Fitzharris, a.k.a. Scholar. I've played him a few times on the show. He is a rapper who incorporates Thelemic and occult material into his songs. And so I will be playing a song of his after the interview. And then also I will be playing a song of his at the end of the show. Then after Christian, we have an interview with Keith 418. He and I discuss cults and the appearance of being cultic and the responses that people have to that in the Thelemic community, as well as occultism in general. And then the last interview is with an academic named Gordan Djurdjevic, and we'll be discussing Indian tantra and its place in Western occultism, especially related to Crowley. And since there's a lot on this show, let's get right into it. So here is the interview with Christian Fitzharris. We have on the phone with us Christian Fitzharris. Are you there, Christian?
I am here, John. Thank you.
Welcome to the podcast, 93.
93, and it's great to be here.
Now, some people know you by your artist name, Scholar, and we've played a number of your songs on the podcast before. Your genre is rap, which is kind of unique in some of the occult circles, we see a lot of either kind of acoustic or electronic and maybe even some heavy metal or death metal like what was played recently. But as far as I'm aware, you're the only rapper who's incorporating esoteric Thelemic material in their repertoire. How did you get into music and incorporating Thelema into rap?
I've always been a huge fan of hip-hop, the hip-hop Muppet generation, if you will, being 32 years old. So I always had a deep love for hip-hop, but I also was influenced by other, that's why you hear such an eclectic sound, and that ranges in everything you just said. It's because I've always had a wide influence, and I kind of pull them together. So I've always loved hip-hop, and I've always loved ceremonial magic, and Thelema specifically, being introduced to Crowley at the age of 17, and then practicing ceremonial magic for 12 years now. It just seemed like a simple marriage that would be real fun to put together, and for me it seemed normal. I started doing this in approximately 1998. I made a CD. I started to record a CD that had Golden Dawn references because I was following that path at that time for those few years. So I was rapping about Golden Dawn stuff, throwing in a little Crowley for good measure, like a big gumbo pot. And everything started to come, but then people said they didn't really understand what I was talking about. So I would rap a song, and instead of someone going, hey, that's really, great song, I can dance to it, instead they went, well, that's cool, but I don't understand what you're talking about because I don't study ceremonial magic or any of this other stuff. So I almost gave up, and then I heard another rapper out there named Kool Keith, who raps about just kind of like anything. He's like an eccentric guy who raps about like aliens and alligators that talk and Shakespeare coming back from the dead and stuff. And I started to realize that if you're weird, you could be weird and say nothing and people still enjoy it. So I could at least say something that means something to a small amount of people and hit that demographic. Okay. And hopefully I bring it with a kind of a hip-hop flow, and it's catchy, The kids like singing, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law and stuff like that. It's catchy, and sometimes can follow you into the shower.
All right. Now, what kind of response has there been to your recent material from non-esoteric people? Have they liked the music, liked the rhymes, and kind of asked about what the things mean and have been drawn into the ideas that you present?
Yeah, that's what is actually most surprising, because I was only doing this, number one, I was doing this for myself, and then I started to, hang out with, whether they're members of the OTO, whether they're practicing Thelemites or ceremonial magicians, they go, hey, there's finally someone I can relate to. So that seemed cool because I actually had an audience I was performing for other than me, and people going, that's neat. But the weird thing has been the transfer over to people who don't have any of this background, and all of a sudden, like on my MySpace page, which we'll talk about later, but it was really funny to go to people's sites and click on their site, and I know them, I've met these people a bunch of times, and they're just like normal, plumbers or engineers or, mechanics, and then they have the most overt Thelemic ceremonial magic song on their page taken from one of my things. Mm-hmm. And that started to become kind of peculiar because you'd look at this person, I knew them from talking with them, and I knew they had nothing to do with anything, so-called metaphysical or occult, and now they've been attracted to such heavy, you can even choose, I have a span of music, so you can choose a more mainstream hip-hoppy thing where there's just a few references, or you can choose something overtly Thelemic or ceremonial. But it was very funny to see these people really reacting well. And I play live shows here in Las Vegas, and I've played everywhere from jazz clubs to the Burning Man regional arts events to my favorite. I played one hip-hop club. That was a good one. That was a tentative time, but, but they really enjoyed it. And then I played my favorite one, which I mentioned in the song LJ, biker bars. I played a biker bar, and it was really the best because it was totally, I was going in there, it was supposed to be like an artsy night, and it was like, yeah, this is going to be the next artsy scene, and it wasn't an artsy scene. It was just a biker bar in the downtown area. It was rough. It had swinging doors and that sort of thing. And I came in like a tie, ready to do metaphysical hip-hop for people that are screaming at the DJ to play something they've heard.
And what was the response from them to your music?
Well, after I figured out who the alpha males in the room were and realized that I had to, I walked over to them because they were eyeing me like they were going to, beat me up or something. I walked directly over to them and I said, ordered a shot and a beer and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And they go, "Nothing. What are you here for?" I said, "Well, I'm going to do some metaphysical hip-hop."